This is Graham from .easy coming to you with another video. Today we're going to be focusing on WordPress security, which we've done a few videos for in the past. We're going to be bringing you another one today as well. Now, the emphasis on WordPress security is, of course, because with any scripting program, there's a lot that goes into it, and with added functionality comes added security risks. So it is very important to make sure that you do take the security of your WordPress site seriously, to make sure that it continues to function the way you want it to, without having anybody play any tricks on you or make it do things other than intended. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be covering a program called WordPress All-in-One Security and Firewall. This program, it's a plugin that you can add to your WordPress to increase the security of it. And when you go ahead and add this, it'll give you a whole bunch of options. It has a couple cool features, like it'll actually show you how strong your site is currently, how strong it suggests it should be. Some neat features like it'll show you how long it would take to crack your password, as well as you can type in random passwords yourself to play with it. There's some firewall settings, some brute force settings, there's some scanning settings. So we're going to be going through all of them. We're going to try and outline anything that's a little more important to keep in mind. And depending on the way you've designed your site, with your themes, your plugins, anything else you've set up, you may need to go through and adjust these a little differently from the way we suggest to do so. We will try and outline these as well, because some themes or some plugins will require certain redirects or special htaccess settings that you've done. So you do want to keep that in mind as well. But we are going to be going through the full plugin, show you what it looks like, and then give you an example afterwards of what happens when you try to go to the site afterwards. And this is all to protect your site from anyone trying to get in and make changes other than you yourself, of course. So we're going to start off here with the WordPress version that we've just done a fresh install. Now, a lot of the settings and things we've done for this installation are terrible settings. There's things you would normally not do on your own, and they're kind of done that way on purpose so that you can see how badly security can be wise if you're just using basic things or if you're just doing bad setups. So we're going to go through and show you how we can take these setups, how we can change it and modify them, and how you can increase the security of your entire site. First thing we need to do is go ahead and actually install the plugin. We can do this by going to Add New under the Plugin section. And then if you do a search, you can type in WP All-in-One Security and do a search for the plugins. And here you can see it's the second one on the list. We're going to go to Install Now. It's going to ask you OK. We just want to click OK to that. And then it's going to install it for us. We don't need to worry about it. Now, for those of you who try and actually install this and do a search and it doesn't come up in the list just because WordPress isn't responding and checking their server, you can actually go to wordpress.org here and you can actually find it under the plugin section. As we can see, it's here. You can find all the information necessary on it. It gives an example. They do have a basic tutorial on here. As you can see, it's only 3 minutes 47 seconds, so it's a quick overview of the features. We're going to be going more in depth, of course, but this is where you can find it if you're having trouble doing the search. Once you've installed it, you want to make sure to activate the plugin, otherwise it's not going to take effect whatsoever, and you're not going to see this nice little icon that just appeared on the left hand side. So now that we can see it's activated, you can either go to Settings in the plugin list, or you can go to WP Security on the left hand side. We're going to be using the one on the left hand side just for simplicity purposes, and it goes down the list so it is easy to do. Now we can see that right now we currently have, as you can see, this little odometer, this meter here, that we're 30 out of 405. So our site is definitely not secure. As you can see here, we've got DB prefixes and some file permissions that suggest we update, and there's some critical security features here which it suggests we update as well. So we need to go through and we need to do a lot of work from what you can see. And this is just a fresh install of WordPress. We've set up a couple things like the username and password a little less secure than they should be, but this is just to give you guys an example of what to look at. So as you go through and you change this, you can keep coming back here to the dashboard, the main page, and you can see how much you're getting it here. Now you don't have to get it all the way to the end if you don't want to, as you can adjust it based on your site and the way you're using it. But of course, the more secure a site is, the better it is. So we're going to go over to Settings next of all to actually start working with them. And it starts here by asking you to back up a lot of your content. Now, whenever you make any changes in WordPress or anything else, good idea to back up everything first, just because if anything happens, well, you can just as easily back it up rather than go through debugging and trying to fix it. Much easier to get everything back up and running. So when you're making changes to this one, we'd suggest right away to back up the files. We suggest to back up the database and the htaccess. Now the files is more of a safe than sorry, and it's a good idea to have a backup of your files, but the main two important ones are the database and the .htaccess file, because that's where this plugin is going to be making a lot of changes to. Now the htaccess file is going to be on the server. It is considered to be a protected system file. So depending on your FTP program, you may have trouble finding it. You can go on through the backup option here and it will actually allow you to back it up straight through WordPress. Additionally, you can go in and do the database as well. You can do that through your cPanel if you want. You can go through the actual plugin itself and do it there. Now, if you're having trouble with the backups or you don't want to be making your own backups, you can sign up for our services. We do have an auto backup service, which does generate backups through a week. It does create some older backups as well, as even a month later. So you can have that automatically set up, and shared hosting, it's $1.50 a month, so it's not very expensive, easy to do, and you always have those backups ready for you. So if you're already subscribed to that, you've got your backups, don't need to worry about it. If you're interested in it, you can contact us. We'll show you how to set it up. But that can do it as well. You can also go through the manual path I've mentioned as well, and those will help you update it. So we're going to be going through, and we're going to skip doing the backups this time just because we've already done our backups ourselves, and even if worse comes to worse, we'll fix it. We'll get through it, so not to worry. Now you can see here, there's the option to disable the security fields and the actual firewall field for everything you've filled in. So if you're ever having trouble after changing something, you can come back to the settings and tell it to get rid of all the settings you've done. That way you don't have to guess and choose in case you filled in an entire page or maybe several pages together. So you do want to come back here if you're having trouble just to clear everything. The options across the top here for the htaccess file, the wp-config file, and the metainfo are more just for backing up for the most part. So you can back up and restore the htaccess file here, and you can back up and restore the hp-config. You can also go ahead and manually edit them if you want, but for the most part, these pages were meant more for backups. Now, the meta information is the first place we're actually going to start. You can see here it's going to give us an extra 5 steps in the security. As I mentioned, that little wheel at the beginning, that we could increase it up to 405. So what this does is the meta information tells someone, if they look at your site, what version of WordPress you're running. Now, for the most part, any visitor, this isn't really important information for them, so it doesn't really matter if it's up there one way or the other. If you're a developer and you forget which version, it is nice to look at, but the main thing why you want to get rid of it is if the hacker knows which version you're using, they know what vulnerabilities are available for it, so they know how to get into it. If you're using a most current version, you're probably going to be okay, not a problem. If you're using an older version though, that's where it can get very dangerous, because older versions are typically updated because there's known vulnerabilities to them. So if you have an older version, it's quite critical to enable this. We would suggest to update your WordPress to newest version regardless, but this will go through and this will make sure that nobody will know what version of WordPress you're using, so they don't have an advanced head start when trying to get into your site. So you want to make sure to check mark this box, and you want to save the settings. Whenever you do the settings here, you'll generally get an update towards the top of anything within this plugin. It'll tell you it worked properly, so you can always go there to make sure it did actually save it. Next, we're going to go into the user accounts. So we can see here right away that it's saying our username is not very secure. Now, you should never use the username of admin. Although as lovely as it is to remember, it is considered to be the default username, which means if a hacker is going to try and get into your site, this is the first thing he's going to try. And this way you can go ahead and help protect yourself by editing the user. So it'll ask you what you want the new username to be. In this case, I'm just going to put it in as .easy. If we click change username, it'll go ahead and actually change it here for us. So whenever you change it right away, I'm going to warn you, you're going to get either, depending on how you've set up your site, you may have custom error pages, but you're going to get a page that's going to say, hey, it didn't work, you can't get in, can't access this page. That's because the username you used is technically invalid, you just erased it, and you changed it with something else. So just go back to the login page right away and log back in just as we showed you, and there we go. You can see now it's set up under .easy. It's our new username we just chose, and it's telling you this is now secure, it's not the default one, you're okay. Now, if you want to, you can manually change the username yourself. You can go into users and you can change it from there. If you do change it manually, you do want to make sure that when you're assigning posts, you want to assign them to a new user. Otherwise, you're going to run the risk of deleting all the posts under the old username, which is very, very important to do. If you do it through this way, it should handle it for you. But if you do it manually, just remember to do that, otherwise you're going to find a lot of posts missing. Now, if you do end up deleting the post by accident, not to worry, you can restore the backup and fix that easily enough, or you can contact us and we'll help you through that, so not to worry. And that's, again, why it's important to make sure there's a backup. So now that we got the administrator, we're going to go to display name. Now for the display name, it's only going to show you that there's an issue with this if your display name actually matches your username. Now for the most part, because we just changed the actual username, it's not going to be the same because they are by default the same thing. This is mainly because your username will show whenever you do a post. If you happen to do a post with your username and a match, you're basically telling a hacker what the actual login name is. So that's why you want to make sure they're different. Next, we're going to go to where it says password. Now this is a neat little tool. So it says that this is how fast someone's going to crack your password. So in the case here where there's no password in, it's saying it's going to take a second. So if you want to do something like a simple password, you can say like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's going to take less than a second for someone to get it. So this is just kind of an example of how hard it's going to be. Whereas if you start typing in other things, like something just simply as .easy123, we can see instantly, now we're up to 9 years and 6 months. So this is a lot more secure. Generally for passwords, you want to use a combination of numbers and letters. You want to make sure your letters are uppercase and lowercase. Generally anything between 8 to 14 characters long is suggested length for them. And if you do any kind of a password, it's best to try and avoid anything to do with the site. So don't take like the actual site URL or domain name and use that as part of the password. And you want to try and avoid very common words found in a dictionary. Because if someone's trying to get in through like a bot, for instance, they're going to have a dictionary loaded into it and just go through all the words. So you want to try and avoid that if possible. So this tool doesn't actually change the password for you. It's more just for checking your password and what you want to use. If you want to change your password, you need to go into the user section, as we mentioned before, and you can change the password from here. But this will give you an idea of how secure your password is and whether or not you want to change it. Now, if you have a password up there and it put the actual password strength of anywhere less than 6 months for cracking time, you can leave that password if you want there, but make sure you change your password in at least half of that time frame to be on the safe side. But we would suggest to make sure it's more secure. But we do understand that sometimes it's hard to remember them, so if you really feel you need to, make sure you change it at least half the time it lists. Next, we're going to go into the user login section. Now this is going to control how someone can actually log into the site. Now this is a bunch of features that are going to help lock things down. It's going to show you a bunch of blogs and other information on how you can do this, as well as extra steps to prevent yourself from someone trying to use bots and other things. So the first option here, it says, is enable login lockdown feature. If we select this option, it means that if someone tries to get into the site and you don't want them to, they're going to get locked down after your settings have shown them, whether this is through a certain amount of times, through a certain username or other things. This will make sure that they'll get locked down for a while until you either say, hey, you can get back in, or no, you're gone for good. You're not allowed to get back in. So we're going to make sure to check mark this. Now, allow unlock requests. This is something you can do based on your choice, and this mainly depends on the site. If you have a subscription-based site or a site with a lot of members on it, you probably want to allow this option for allowing unlock requests, because that way if a user forgets their username, forgets their password or something, they're going to get unlocked and they're going to get a request to their main email they signed up with and tell them, hey, you were trying to get in, you didn't have trouble with this, you've been locked out, so now you need to contact us and unlock this. If you're not using anything that's got members or a lot of people going into it, you probably don't want to enable this, and actually I would encourage you not to, because you don't want to let the person know that their account hasn't been unlocked, or you don't want to know that yourself. You just want to let the person know that, hey, they're locked out, they're not getting back in, they're not allowed to until you go in and adjust it yourself. Now, we're going to, like I said, leave it unlocked in this case just based on our settings, but again, if you use a lot of members, you'll want to enable that. The max login attempts allows for how many times you can fail to log in before it's going to lock you out. The default setting here is 3, which means if we try and sign in 3 times, we fail to log in, within, in this case, the period of 5 minutes, you're locked out. You're not getting back in for whatever your unlock time you set. So generally, you want to set this anywhere from 5 to 10 to keep it secure. We're going to go a little more on the extreme side of things and we're going to do 5. So if someone fails to sign in 5 times, they're not going to run. Now, the login time period, we're going to set this a little higher. We're actually going to set this to anywhere from 60 minutes, just because we want to be a little bit on the more secure side. So you can't just kind of give it a bit of time in between failed attempts. We prefer to have it so if you try and get in, you're either going to get in or get out. And that way your users, you're going to tell very quickly whether or not they actually have the information or whether they don't. The lockout time is how long before the system will automatically let them back in. Now, I would suggest setting this anywhere from 60 minutes to more. In this case, I'm going to set it to 2 hours, and that just kind of gives someone the benefit of the doubt that, okay, you locked down for a bit of time. It's not the default time, it's a little longer. So if someone's going to try and get in, they're trying to hack in, it's going to block them out for time, and they're probably going to give up within this time frame. You can set it to much, much longer if you want. If you set this to a very large number, then they're pretty much never getting in unless you allow them back in. So it's your choice of how you want to do that. The display generic error message is a great one to put in. This means that if someone fails to log in, they won't actually get an error message saying they're locked down after a certain amount of times. This will instead just keep saying, hey, your username and password are invalid. This doesn't give away the hint that they're actually being blocked. Now, if it's a hacker or it's a bot, it's not going to know there's anything wrong, and it's going to keep trying, which is ideally what you want. Because if they find out there's an issue with it, they're going to switch their IP address so they can try and get back in again. They're going to switch from a different computer, different machine, try and get around it using proxy server or something else, or they may move on to a different section site or a different site altogether. So it is a good idea to enable this. That way no one has any idea of what's going on, and it helps protect the site a little better. Next one we're doing is instantly lock on invalid usernames. This one we're going to enable as well. It is very nice to have. Unless someone does an actual typo on a username, which it does happen. I've done it myself, definitely when you're working a little too fast through it. And this will mean that if you do a typo or you type in a username that does not exist for whatever reason, they are instantly locked out. Even if it's the first attempt and you've got it set to 500 attempts before it locks out, it's instantly gone. You're not getting in whatsoever. This one is a good one to enable because you want to enforce proper usernames. Some people may get typos. Again, you can let them know that they need to be careful with it. They will be blocked. For anyone that's regularly using their site, once you make these changes, you may want to send them a notification ahead of time just so they're aware of this. Otherwise, if someone shows up on a blacklist, you can always let them know later, so not to worry. Last thing we're going to do is notify by email. This lets us know that whenever something happens, someone's been locked down or there's an issue, it's going to email us and let us know about it. This way you can easily manage your site without worrying about it because you'll get email notification. Now, if you have a lot of users, you may not want to enable this because you could very easily be flooded by emails if someone trying to get into the site or trying to do something. So if you have a large amount of users, you may want to not bother with this. You may want to instead just manually go in and check this from time to time. Now in the list here below, we can see there's no IP addresses, there's no anything showing up because this is a fresh install, nobody's failed to log in whatsoever. But if you go in and even yourself try and fail to log into your site, you'll start seeing the attempts show up here, and it shows mainly the username, which shows you who they tried to get in as or what they were doing, shows you their IP address, which is what connection they're trying to go through. You do want to keep note of those because you can add those later on in this video we're going to show you to a blacklist so that that person can't get back in anymore. And then the release date. This is when they're scheduled to be automatically released, and you can decide whether or not to release them early. If you have multiple different ones in here, you can go ahead and do a bulk action so you can unlock or delete them. If you unlock them, it'll show up in the list and still be there. If you delete them, it'll just get rid of them out of the list. And that'll take care of that for the lockdown options. We're next going to go to login Captcha. Actually, we're just going to save it here. Attempts. Next one. You want to make sure to save the settings there so that it actually takes effect. And then you want to go to login Captcha next. And in here, we're going to enable this on both of these. Now, Captcha is very, very important because Captcha prevents you from what are called bot attacks. This is basically the laser way a hacker can try and get in, is they'll go ahead and not actively do anything themselves. They'll instead set up a computer program. So we'll try and get into your site either by continuously signing in or continuously trying to post something. Captcha avoids this from happening. It's the little box that asks you to type in something as it appears, generally a number and letter combination, to prove that you're an actual human person. This is there to prevent, again, bots from spamming your site. So anywhere where this Captcha basically being enabled, check mark it right away. Great to have it on there. Some people may complain. I mean, can be annoying. I definitely agree, but it's better to be safe than sorry. And Captcha only takes, an extra 5 seconds tops to add in, so it's really not that bad of a thing. It is a good idea to make sure you go in and save it. The Log and Whitelist, at the beginning, you're not going to put a lot of this in here. You want to make sure to enable it. What the whitelist does is it first of all tells you your current IP address. Now this is saying that this is where you're currently connecting from. If you know that you have a static IP address, this number the one you're looking for, you're golden with it. If you're using multiple IP addresses because you have what's called a dynamic IP address or an IP range, then you're going to need to do a little more research to find out which one to add here. If you're not sure whether you have a static IP or a dynamic IP, or you're not sure what your range is, you can contact your internet provider. They'll provide you with all of this information and show you how to get it if you need it. Now, once you've got the IP address or the range, you want to add it into this box below. So where it says enter whitelist IP address, what this does is this says that this IP address is always valid. Never block it, never affect it. It's always okay to go in. So you do want to make sure to very carefully go through and do it. If you have an IP range, you may even want to decide not to add your IP on purpose, just because there is a possibility of other people with your same internet provider getting that IP address from time to time when they rotate through. So we're going to go ahead and enable this. We're not going to add anything for this case because we're using a dynamic IP. Now you do want to go ahead and make sure to change it. Oh, it actually says you need to submit one IP address here. So we're just going to go ahead and submit the default one it shows us. And we're just going to go 127.0.0.1 just to show it. This IP address actually doesn't mean any specific location anywhere. It actually represents your local computer. We're just using this as an example. You don't want to put this in. But we're just kind of showing it as an example. So now we can see that it's got the IP address to the listed. We're enabling it, and there we go. It now shows us 15 out of 15. We're then going to go to where it says failed login records. And we can see here that there's now a failed login. It shows from one we did earlier. It's showing it's coming from an IP range. So you can always go ahead and delete or unlock anything that's in there. And this is mainly just for monitoring purposes. So if you are manually monitoring this or not relying on the actual incoming emails to notify you, you do want to check this from time to time. The same goes with the forced logouts here. We're going to be monitoring this, so instead of logging in monitoring, we're going to be changing the actual log count. So this will create it so that it stores a session for your site. The session will only store for a certain amount of time indicated by the box here. So this means that after 60 minutes have passed from the time you logged in, it's going to automatically lock you out and force you to sign back in again. Now, depending on how often you work on your site and what you're doing with the site, you may want to increase this or decrease this. If you only go in to make minor changes all the time, you may want to decrease this to something as small as 30 minutes. If you find yourself constantly working on your site doing massive or larger updates, going ahead and changing this to a period of about maybe even 2 hours would be a good way to do this. So that's what we're going to do in this case here. We're going to change it to 2 hours. We're going to click Save Settings. We're now going to go into the account activity logs. And here we can see this is anytime anyone logs in, it'll show what username they tried to get in with, what the IP address they're connecting from, and what they're doing with it. So this is, again, just for looking at everything. Now, unlike the failed logins, this shows every login. So that means successful ones, unsuccessful ones. So you do want to keep an idea of what's going on here. The logged in users also shows you who's actually logged in right now. Shows you a little lesson information of when they're logged in or things like that because they're already logged in. But it does show the actual IP address again of where they're connecting from. So if you see a bunch of people logged in from the same IP address, you may want to take a look into that, because unless there's a lot of users from the same location, like a business or something, there shouldn't be the same IP address, and it may be an indication that someone's going into other accounts. So you do want to keep that in mind. It is a good thing to watch for as well. So that's how we can go through and we can do all the settings here. Now we're just going to go ahead and actually remove the log and whitelist example because we were just showing it earlier. The reason why is the IP address we did was a local one, so it would go ahead and kill this out for us if we tried to log in afterwards, because that whitelist is there. So what we're going to do then is we're going to go into user registration. And here, what this does is this means any site that you have where users are allowed to register on, whether you do like a subscription-based service or whether you're doing this is the one that's actually implemented through WordPress. If you're using a non-WordPress login system, when you've designed yourself through a separate script, this may not affect it, so you just want to keep that in mind. But for this here, this is regarding to the WordPress one. This will make it so someone can't create bogus accounts and try and create them to either spam you, to create a whole bunch of spam accounts or things like that. So it is a good idea to save the settings for this one as well. The registration Captcha, as we mentioned before, Captcha is always good. This makes it so when someone registers a new account, it does force them to prove they are human by adding that content at the bottom. We're then going to go to where it says database security is the next one. Now the database security is going to ask you right away to change it to a different address. Now, The database prefix, for the most part, if you set it up through Softaculous or you set it up through anything else yourself, it's probably not going to be using a default setup, so you don't need to worry about it. What it's mainly doing is it's mainly trying to avoid the WordPress setup of WP as the database prefix, because this is one that hackers will look for automatically, because some of the older WordPress versions used to set it up and do it that way, or sometimes if you're using the auto installer, it can do it that way too. But if you're setting it up through Softaculous, it'll generally install it to a different prefix automatically for you. As you can see here, ours was already set to something different. If you want to generate it to a new table, you can go in and change it yourself. It's very simple to do. You can tell it to generate a random one for you, or you can actually type in your own prefix depending on how you want to do it. If you're not sure about this whatsoever, we'd suggest to leave it off and not touch it. If it says a 10 out of 10, that means you're okay. If it says you're 0 out of 10 because it's using WP, we suggest to use the top values just so it randomly generates one for you, and then it takes care of it all for you. Don't need to worry about it. For those of you who are manually administrating your database, or if you have any scripts that are connecting through like a own database or something else, then you definitely do not want to adjust this without first checking to see whether it will interfere with your scripts. So it is very important. The database backup can be done through here. You can see that it can automatically backup for you. In this case, we're not going to automatically tell it to backup for us. And the reason for that is anytime you have an automatic backup, it's going to consume resources on the server to do so. Generally, this can be a bad thing, because if there's a lot of people on your site, or if you have some scripts running on a site that just require a lot of resources, well, it's going to go ahead and start to bog down the site. On top of it, you can even possibly crash your server, which is also why if you do decide to go this route, make sure to put it at very long intervals. You want to set this at least a day apart. We suggest doing it longer, probably around a week, but it is a better idea to just leave it off and do a backup of the database whenever you yourself make changes to the site. If you do a number of backup files, make sure you don't keep too many, as they can get big if you have a larger database and it can store up a lot of space. Then that can result in slower browsing times. You can send it through yourself to an email if you want to, but we would suggest against enabling this just because it can run into resource issues. If you're concerned about resource issues and you do want an automatic backup, you can go for our backup service, which for shared hosting is again $1.50 a month, and that uses up resources on a different server because it stores it in a different location for you, and it does do the backups a little easier system-wise, because we want to basically avoid any kind of downtime or downside to the site, so not to worry. But this is where you can schedule it if you want to. You can create your backup if you want as well. Next thing we're going to go to is file system security. So in the file system security here, this has already done a lot of the actual security itself on the site. And as we can see from the permissions, is already set to where it is. Now, for those of you who are just leaving WordPress to do pretty much its own changes, you don't need to worry about this whatsoever. It's basically got the proper permissions on here, which is the 750 for the main folder. Other folders are going to be 755, which is proper, and then 644 is the file permission type as well. Now, these may seem like a lot of random numbers, and for the most part, they are. They actually do have specific meanings. If you do look at what are called the permissions of the files, this is their read access, their write access, and their execution status. So if you want a file, for instance, to be viewed by anyone online, you need to make sure it's accessible to the world, and you need to make sure the world can actually see it, but you want to prevent it from being writable. This means that if we have any kind of a file that's set too high, like a 777 for instance, that means that anyone in the world can open up that file, make whatever changes they feel like to it, and then have the site save those changes for you. As you can think of, this is a good way to get your site hacked. Now, this may seem like a little bit above and beyond, which is why it's set up default to not do it. For those of you who are manually changing your site, you may have scripts that require 7.7 access. We'd highly suggest against this, and instead of doing this, we'd suggest to try and contact the script provider, or if you wrote the script yourself, to instead have it automatically change the permissions while your script is running. So it changes it away from the 777 originally, so it's set at something like a 644 normally. It goes ahead, opens up the file, changes the permission, does whatever it needs to, and then changes it back. This is a good, important way to protect your site from being hacked. It's a little above and beyond from what you normally do, but we want to try and make sure you can see here and get a bunch of options for it. Next thing here is in regards to PHP editing. Now, this is depending on how your site is and what you want to do with it. if you edit your site and you actually do it through the theme editor or through an FTP program or your own website editor, if you prefer using Dreamweaver, Eclipse, any program whatsoever, you want to make sure the PHP editing is on. This way, anytime you make changes through the dashboard or any of the files you're looking at through the dashboard get changed, it's not going to try and block you out because it's going to say those changes are okay. If you prefer just using WordPress itself and you're using the default editor, so the one that looks like WordPad, you're looking at source code whatsoever, and you don't go into the theme editor and make changes there, then you want to enable this. That way no one else can go in and make changes without your knowledge. Now we're going to leave this one off just personally ourselves, because if we're making changes to the site, we're generally going to go into the source code ourselves. So we're going to leave that off. But if you don't work with source code whatsoever, enable it. Good one to do. Next one we're going to go to is file access. So this prevents access to the default WordPress files. We'd suggest to enable this because really the default WordPress files should not be opened or accessed by anything outside of WordPress itself. So it is very, very important to go through and make changes to this so that they're there. Now the WordPress files themselves are generally not going to be hacked, but they are cases of it going in. One of them is the WP config file. There is a demo file of it showing there, which is just an example. It's kind of a helper file, but someone could hack their way in through that. So there are a couple files which do make it important to protect, and there's really no downside from doing it. So we do want to make sure to enable that one when we're making changes. Next one we're going to go to is the host system logs. Now this isn't something in security wise, this is more just helping you. If there's a problem with the site, this is showing where the error logs are going to show. It's going to tell you what exactly happened, where the problem was, and why it didn't work. If you're having a problem with file permission, if you set up some of the settings here and you can't get back in, you can go check the error log you set up here and told it where to go to actually find out why it's not allowing you in. Next one we're going to go to is the whois lookup. Whois lookup is actually not, in terms of security, really a setting or anything. It's more of a neat little tool like the password checker. Whois is a public database that shows you certain information. You can go to look up information about the domain someone's trying to connect from. If you can see a site there, you can go look up an IP address as well, and you can try and find out a little bit more information. You can do Google searches about this as well. This is more just a tool here for simplicity's sake in case you need to look up some information. The next one we're going to go to is the Blacklist Manager. The blacklist comes down and it tells us where we don't want people to be connecting from. We are going to enable this in this case. Now, if you ever seen any of those logs we showed you earlier, those tables of the access or the failed logins, and you see an IP address that you know is going to be bad, like, hey, this person trying usernames that don't exist, or this person's going in a bunch of times to a bunch of different accounts, not getting into any of them, well, you want to start adding those to this list. What that does is that means if they try and connect from that computer or that network ever again, it's not going to allow them in whatsoever, which is good because that way it's going to help protect it. Now, by default, your WordPress is going to be monitoring IPs, and if they try and fail a bunch of times, it's going to lock it for a period of time. The difference between this and those type of blocks is this is permanent, meaning until you remove it from this list, that person's never going to get in. So you do want to make sure that if you are banning someone, you want to make sure that it is the right person. You don't want to do any IPs, because otherwise it is possible that someone you actually want to get in is going to be blocked. So if you do find users who have trouble getting in afterwards, after you started implementing this, you may want to ask them for what their IP address is, because you may have accidentally put it on a blacklist. The enter user agents here, the user strings is going to help you prevent different things. So if you don't want certain things from going in there, this you want to look at the more examples just as a list of it. Now this can be anything from as complex, if you use the user strings to be an actual browsers. You can outright block certain browsers from going in if you don't want them to, such as an older browser like IE7, because it may not load your site properly, so you may want to block and not give access, versus you may want to block out certain types of bots, like if there's a robot that's browsing your site a bunch and you don't want it there because it's using up resources, or say you don't want Google indexing your site for a while, you can add them into here so they can't get in. So once you've made any changes to here, you can click on Save Settings, and it will actually force you to put a login. As you can see here, they won't let you do the empty tables, so you can actually put something in here and then it will save it. Next, we're going to go to the firewall. Now, the firewall is important, and you do want to keep in mind of what your site is doing. If you use a lot of data transmission or a lot of scripts that need to go to different servers or locations, you need to be very careful on how you customize the firewall setups and what you do with this. So you may want to be a little more careful if you're not sure of how to go forward with this. You may want to check with your network admin or your script or server provider, or your actual program providers as well, and just find out what's going to work best for you. If you're not sure, you can always contact us and we can help walk you through it. We're going to apply the basic firewall protection to the site. We're also going to protect against pingback vulnerability, and we're going to set those on. We're then going to go into the additional firewall rules. So these are some additional things that help protect it. So if you do the listing directory content, this means that someone can't do a basic listing and they can't see what folders or file structures you're using. So we're going to enable that. Next one we're going to do is trace and track. This is using trackback content, which is used by some WordPress plugins and themes. It's a good way to actually crash the site if someone takes advantage of it. So that one's a little more important to make sure they set up and do. The proxy comment posting, make sure that someone can't use a proxy server. They can't show up as anonymous. They have to actually show their location of where they're coming from. This helps accountability-wise, make someone come from where they're supposed to be. It also makes sure that someone can't be using a third-party server or somewhere else to try and post content on your site. Bad query strings mean someone can't try and manually type in a URL and try and guess or hit a site. You don't want them to, so it is a good thing to set up as well. The advanced character string will help block out things from being entered. This is if someone trying to gain access to your site through injection. It's going to make sure that they can't try and get into this. It's something like they may add a code into a post, trying to get it to go into the database and cause your database to crash. They may try and get a post a comment to send like an email attached to it instead of just actually posting it to your site. So these are all good to add. So we're going to go to Save Additional Firewall Settings. We're going to go over to the 5G Blacklist Firewall rules. These are some additional firewalls that are set up from a different service, so you can enable that if you want. We're going to do that here, just because it's extra protection. There's nothing wrong with it. If you're, again, concerned about your settings because you're referencing other servers, you'll definitely want to check with them first whether or not that would be okay. And the next thing is brute force protection. Now, brute force protection on the site is extremely important because if someone's trying to get into your site, this is generally the most common way of how they're going to do it. They're going to try and get in by trying to guess and check their way through it because they're not going to have the password. They're going to have maybe the username because they grabbed it off a post or something else, or maybe they got it from somewhere else at most, but generally they're just randomly trying username and passwords until they get lucky with it. This type of protection prevents against that. Now, we're going to enable this right away here. I want to put that in. You can see the secret word here put in test page, but you can use any kind of secret word you want. Depending on how your WordPress is set up, you may have this come in blank. It's not to worry if it does. But the secret word you're typing in here is a special URL it's going to set up for you on the account. And we're going to go with, just in this case, we're going to put in test page again. And just to give you an example, we would suggest to make this as complex as you can. This will be the new login page that you're going to be going to, so do keep that in mind. You're going to be able to copy this down. I'm going to show you where it actually shows you what it is, so you can even copy it, or you can try and manually set up your own bookmark if you want. The redirect URL is going to tell them where it's going to go if they don't go there. So for instance, if someone tries to go to the older login page, which is the wp-login.php or wp-admin, it's going to take them to this error page instead. So they're never going to be able to get back in unless they know the secret word you're using. Now you can go ahead here and select the two bottom options, which is in case you have password protect areas of your WordPress, or if you're using Ajax in your theme. Now these two are a little more important. If you're using password protection, so any type of password protection on either post pages or anywhere else on the site, it is mandatory that you do make sure to check mark this box, because otherwise it's going to rewrite your htaccess file and they are not going to be able to get into these pages. It's going to treat them as if they're failing to log in. So you do need to make sure to check mark this to set up the exception. Now, if you're using any kind of Ajax, it's going to not like these kind of redirects. So you do want to make sure to check mark this if you're using Ajax functionality, and it'll change it around. Since we're just using a basic one and most people with theirs don't have Ajax in there, we're just going to leave it off. If you're not sure whether or not your theme or plugins use Ajax, check with the theme provider or the plugin provider, as they'll be able to confirm that as well. But they generally will list it in the system requirements somewhere. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to save the settings here. Now, one thing you may see is we right now have saved features settings up here. We just want to point out that you may see another page here, depending on your browser, which says test cookie settings. So if you have one asking you to test the cookies, you do want to make sure to actually test that first of all. That's just to make sure that your browser enables cookies. In this case, it already knew that our browser has cookies set up and it's allowing them. So that's why we didn't see it. Ours went immediately to save feature settings instead. But if you do see the test cookie settings, make sure to click that first. It will actually wipe this page because it refreshes the cookies. So you do need to make sure to go through and check and set up all the options again in that case. And then you need to hit Save Feature Settings afterwards. Now, after you save it, you're going to see this section at the top here. Very, very important. This here we can see where it says sampledomain.net/test page equals 1. That's the new login page. If you do not go to this page, you will not be able to get into your WordPress after you make these changes here we've mentioned. So you do want to make sure to go ahead and make changes to this. In this case, we're actually going to copy this, and we're just going to type this in another browser in this case. So we can tell this went to the right login page because it took us to the actual dashboard again. In the event we weren't logged in like we are right now, it actually forced us to log in instead. If you try and use the actual normal page, so sampledomain.net/ and then we're going to go to wp-admin/ afterwards, we can see here it's got the dashboard again because we're logged in. Now what we're going to show you is what happens if you're not logged in. So we're going to log out of here, and we can see it took us back here. So what we're going to do now is we're going to just copy and paste the whole thing in again because it's easier that way. And we can see it brings us back to the test page here. Now what we're going to do is we need to go in and actually clear on our cookies to show you what this is going to look like otherwise, because it's saved a cookie on the page. So we're in Firefox, we have to go to clear history. If you're using Safari, you can empty cache from the main Safari menu at the top. If you're using Internet Explorer, you can go into delete the history from the actual menu as well. So we're just going to kill everything because we don't worry about it whatsoever. So now that we've done that here, we can go to sampledomain.net/ and then wp-login.php. So if we try and go here, we can see, bang, doesn't let us in whatsoever. We haven't set up the default error page yet, which is why it's not bringing anything, but you can tell here, not going to let you in whatsoever. Now, instead of this, we're going to go to the URL we set up, and now we can see there's our login page. So this is just an example of what it's going to look like. So now that we've done that, we need to log back in here, type in the username we set up, and then you can see there's also the Captcha showing at the bottom. So in this case, it's asking us a math question. 14 plus 19 equals 33. My bad. Sorry, it's been a long day. All right, so we got that in here. And apparently I typed in the wrong password. I'm sorry about that. Let's do that again. And then 9 plus 8 is 17. Log in. And there we go. We're back in. And because I actually typed in the password wrong, that's going to give us a good example of going back and checking the other information. So we're going to go back in here to user login just to give you an example. And we can see where it says failed logins. It shows us the failed logins we did here. So this is just an example of what you can see here, although we did by accident, but there's a good example here that shows you, yes, this is a failed login, this is what it's going to look like. So you can go and you can see this is the time they failed to log in, this is the IP address, and it's going to go ahead and after a certain amount of time, block it out. So you can go in here and you can delete these, you can unblock them however you want. So we're just going to delete these in this case because we know they were done by us, they're not a problem. So now that we've got that one done, we're going to go down to the brute force section, which is the next one going down the settings. And here it allows you to rename your login page. So you can enable the relogin if you want. Now, these can be a little more tricky, and we would probably suggest you don't do this one, especially if you've set up the other brute force protection we did. Just because if you rename the login page and you've already set up a secret word, depending on how the cookies and the htaccess and the way you've set up your themes and plugins, there's a good chance it's not going to get to your login page at all. So it's a good idea to do one or the other. If you're not sure which one to use, we would highly suggest to go with the firewall option instead. It's a much more secure and better way to go. This one will allow you to set up an additional login page if you want. If you're not using any special htaccess or redirects or anything else, it will work. And they do work in conjunction, but we found through our trial and experience and from other people using it as well, that if you do use them together and you do use a theme that uses some redirects or some custom permalink settings, there's a good chance you're going to end up not being able to get back in. So in this case here, because we set up the other one and it is the better way to go about it, we're actually not going to check mark this. But if you do want to set up both of them, you certainly can. If you do end up having trouble getting in afterwards, this is why we can help you fix that, so not to worry. The last one here is to help protect you against spam. So we're going to go ahead and enable the Captcha again. Captcha, as we mentioned before, is protecting anyone from trying to use a bot to spam your site, as it basically explains here. So we can easily go to Save Settings. And then you can even see if someone has been spamming you, it's going to show their IP, show the number of spam comments per IP address if you want, so it'll detect it. In this case here, we're going to set it to 1 because we don't like spam whatsoever. If you set it to 1 or even 2, you may accidentally get some people who put in something and they may just word it badly. I mean, it's unfortunate, but it happens. But that's just an example, so you can set that up and do it as you wish. Next one here is a scanner. Now the scanner will go through and it'll take a look at your settings and it'll do it how often it changes. So this is actually scanning for changes on a site. You probably, depending on your site, may not want to use this at all because, again, it can be a little more resource intensive because it will go ahead and it'll check the sites and it'll actually have to scan through the files. It does use resources. If you do it when there's heavy usage, you can see it definitely go a little more sluggish on the site. If you do scans for the site and you do set it up to automatic, don't set it at more than a day again because you're going to definitely see an increase of resource usage on the site. Probably about a week is a good statistic, or if you want to, you can set up the scan so it's every time you make changes or before you make changes. Anytime you do a scan and come back clean, good idea to back it up right there and then. Great time to do it. You can tell it to ignore certain files if you want. This can be if they're like read-only files, or if they're files you haven't touched, or if they're files that really generally don't ever get touched. Like you can do picture files, things like that. It's up to you. We'd suggest typically to not ignore files unless there's a very clear reason why you think you should. You can also make it so if there's a change done on the site, you can have it email you to notice this. If you have a lot of people that work on the site, like a lot of contributors, don't check the mark this option. It's going to flood your email, and you're going to have to check with each of them to see what they did. It's going to be a lot of work, but you can still definitely do it. If you're the only one working on the site, we would suggest to check mark this because you want to make sure that you're the only one making changes. So I'm going to go ahead and check mark that option in this case. You can also go up to the top here for Malware Scan, and it gives you a bunch of information about scanning it. It gives you an external location. We have done other videos suggesting to install the Security plugin. You can contact us. We can help you get information on how to scan it. You can go to their website and scan it as well. But it's just kind of an indication that yes, you can go ahead and scan it if you do find anything. And then the very final option here is maintenance. So if you remember before where we saw that other page, so this is a lockout page. So before where we just got it coming up and saying, hey, you can't get in. If you enable this, it'll go ahead and put this site instead. So we're going to put this in here. We're just going to leave the default page. Again, leaving this as generic as possible is going to help prevent that someone can't get in that they don't know. It's just going to be like an under maintenance page instead. You could even put that if you want. Like, hey, we're making changes to the site. You can't get in right now, and then you can monitor it yourself. As basic as it goes, it's a better way to put it. So those are just kind of ideas, and again, some settings we would suggest. Now, if we go back to the dashboard as we showed you at the beginning, you can see now it's much, much stronger. We're now 335 out of 405. And we even left some of them off because we felt that the way we were changing the site didn't feel they were needed. So you may have this higher, you may have this lower. It's definitely not a bad thing. It's up to you whether or not you have this set up or not. And we can see here most of the things here are all set up, so they're good to go. And then this helps make sure that your site is more secure. So anybody trying to get in to hack it or make changes without your knowledge, definitely going to be a lot harder for them to do so, a lot easier for you to help protect it. We do still suggest to go in and manually check things yourself. Additionally, going through and backing it up on your own is a good idea. We do have the auto backup service, and this will help to do it. If you want to do the auto backups that go through this plugin, as we mentioned before, they can be a little more resource intensive. If your site's already very large or has a lot of traffic, you may want to start thinking about going up to our cloud hosting or our unlimited hosting SSD option, because they do provide much more better resource options. They have better hardware to equip for it, so you're going to find that being a lot better off, and that'll be better off for these. The cloud hosting is its own hosting server, so you can't set up special features you can't normally get access to in shared hosting, and it can give you some much more fun toys to play with. Additionally, if you do have a lot of sites, they do allow for you to set them all up with their own cPanels, so it is much easier that way. The SSD hosting does have the new SSD drive versus a normal drive. It has much better on protection as well. It does have better hardware, so they are much better option to go with. It's only a little bit more expensive too, so it's not that much more. So if you're looking for the bump or you're not sure, we suggest to contact us. We can take a look at your site, see what it's using, see what it's doing, and seeing if an SSD upgrade is the better way to go. It does depend on what your site is doing. The main difference is whenever you go through a solid state drive, it's kind of similar to a microprocessor or the way RAM works, in that it caches information and can index it faster. So that means if you have a lot of content, a lot of pictures or things like that, they're going to come up a lot faster because it's going to know where they are, it's going to have them preloaded, and bang, they're up they go. If you're using anything like an old disk drive, so like the normal unlimited hosting, it has to go like a record player. It has to find the specific information on the drive where it is and pull the information off, and it can only do so much at once. So it is a little slower off, and if you are using a lot of content-driven site, you're going to see it's a lot slower on the process, especially if you decide to do the auto backups here. So you may want to decide to go that option. Again, if you're not sure, contact us. We'll look through it for you. We'll find out which one would work better for you and our suggestion towards it. We can work through with you because you may be able to optimize your scripts to go with other things. But this is all set here to make sure that your site's secure. You can set it up for backups, and you're going to have all the resources you need to make sure your site's going to keep running properly. And this is everything we wanted to show you to make sure it's working. And now that we've gone through and shown you everything that's here, you can easily go back through and check through, make any changes. If for whatever reason you see your site break, it can happen if you accidentally set one of the settings that conflicts with the theme or plugin or something. You can either restore your backup or you can contact us for support. We'd be more than happy to help you. If not, you can certainly follow us on Facebook, on Twitter as well, and on our YouTube account. We will be bringing more video, more security features and other things on top of this. I'm more than happy to bring you other content. You can leave us comments if you're having trouble with anything. We'll be sure to follow up with you and help you out with those. Thank you for watching our video, and thank you for using .exe.